Warnings. The following broadcast contains high-octane nightmare fuel gathered from the darkest corners of the internet. Keep your eyes on the road. Keep your doors locked. And whatever you do, don't look in the rear-view mirror. You are listening to Grave Shift, 18 Wheels to Hell.
Before we lose ourselves in the dark, a quick word for those of you behind the wheel of a rig tonight. Graveshift is a proud partner of CDL Club. Out here, your license isn't just a piece of plastic, it's your livelihood. But the road can be unpredictable, and one bad day can put everything you've built at risk. That's where CDL Club comes in. They provide the legal protection and driver-first support you need to fight citations and keep your record clean. Don't leave your future to chance. Protect your career so you can keep the wheels turning. To learn more, visit cdlclub.com. Now, back to the road.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are opening a file that I think a lot of people think they know, or at least they know the headlines.
They know the name for sure.
They know the name. But the reality of this case is so much more mechanical and frankly much more disturbing than the sensationalism ever really conveyed.
I think that's the perfect word for it, mechanical.
Right. So today, we are stripping away the horror movie tropes to get right down to the specific machinery of how a serial predator operates within a system that was, effectively designed to keep people safe. We are looking at the case of Ivan Robert Marco Milat.
Most people know him by the moniker the press gave him, the backpacker killer. And while that is, of course, accurate regarding his victims, that nickname it almost softens the reality. It makes it sound like a campfire story, something you tell in the dark.
Right, like a bogeyman.
Exactly. But when you look at the source material, the police briefs, the forensic logs, the psychological profiles, you realize we aren't dealing with a chaotic movie monster. We're dealing with, as you said, a logistical expert, a technician of murder.
And we are looking at a very specific window of time here. I mean, the confirmed active period is between 1989 and 1993. But the mission for this deep dive isn't just to recount the timeline of who went missing and when.
No.
We want to analyze the profile. Because
Okay.
when you look at the source material, when you really dig into these files, there is this terrifying contradiction that sits at the very center of this entire case.
It's the contradiction that allowed him to operate for so long without detection. I mean, usually when we profile serial killers, especially those who hunt on highways or engage in what law enforcement calls interdiction crimes,
You expect a certain type, right?
you do. You expect a transient. You expect a drifter, someone living in the shadows, someone with no roots who moves from town to town, the guy who is fundamentally invisible because he never stays put.
Exactly. The classic FBI profile of a highway killer is the guy living out of a beat-up van, moving state to state, never staying in one place long enough to get noticed. But Ivan Milat, he's the polar opposite of that.
Completely.
He wasn't drifting. He was a unionized, fully employed government worker.
And that is the absolute key to this entire thing. He didn't just drive on the highway. He literally built and maintained the very road he used as a hunting ground. He worked for the Roads and Traffic Authority, the RTA, for nearly 20 years.
20 years. That is the crucial aha moment in this file. It's this concept of camouflage. Think about the psychology of a hitchhiker, or any tourist for that matter.
Yeah.
If you see someone getting into a rusty, beat-up van with a scruffy stranger who looks like he hasn't showered in a week.
Alarm bells start ringing. Your instinct, their sort of lizard brain, says danger.
But Milat,
Milat is driving a well-maintained vehicle. He's often coming from or going to work. He might even be wearing the uniform of the road, the high-vis orange or yellow vest. It's what I call high-vis vest invisibility.
I like that phrase.
You don't suspect the man who is fixing the guardrail. You don't suspect the man who looks like he owns the road because, in a very literal sense, his job is to maintain it. He's part of the landscape.
It short-circuits the threat response entirely. You see, infrastructure, not predator. So before we go any further, I need to orient you, the listener. This is going to be a heavy investigation. We are going to focus specifically on the mechanics of these crimes, how he lured them, the deception used to lower their defenses, and the forensic evidence that eventually, finally, unmasked him.
And we should probably add a disclaimer here. Based on the source material we've got, this gets incredibly disturbing. We're talking about executions, decapitations, and just extreme forms of violence. So please be aware of that as we proceed.
Okay, let's unpack this profile. We called him the roadman in our notes. Let's really look at his occupation. The source material says he worked for the RTA for nearly 20 years. That's a long time to be in any job, let alone manual labor.
20 years is a lifetime in that kind of job. And you have to think about what that job actually entails. He wasn't sitting in an office planning routes on a map.
No.
He was a road gang worker, a truck driver. He was out there on the bitumen, operating heavy machinery up and down the Hume Highway.
And for those who don't know the geography, the Hume Highway is the main artery connecting Sydney to Melbourne. It's massive. It's constantly busy. It's the spine of transport in that whole region of Australia.
Absolutely. And because of his job, Milat possessed a strategic advantage that the police, frankly, just didn't have. See, a police officer patrols the road. They drive up and down looking for speeders or accidents. They see the surface.
What a road worker.
A road worker knows the anatomy of the road. He knew the infrastructure inside and out. He knew every turnout. He knew every rest stop. But more importantly, he knew the things that aren't on the tourist maps. He knew the secrets of the road.
You're talking about the fire trails.
Exactly. The unmapped, often unmarked fire trails leading off the highway and deep into the dense state forests, these are just dirt tracks really, cut into the forest to allow fire trucks access during bushfires.
They aren't signposted. There's no scenic view this way.
Not at all. If you turn down one, you disappear from the public eye instantly. And Milat, from 20 years of working that stretch of land, he knew which ones were locked, which gates were broken, which trails were overgrown, and which ones led to perfect, secluded dead ends where he would never, ever be disturbed.
Oh, that's a really chilling detail. The idea that while the police are setting up roadblocks or putting out an APB for a suspicious vehicle, the guy they're hunting is probably driving right past them in a government truck.
Waving,
knowing exactly which 10-foot gap in the trees to turn into to just vanish.
That's literally what the sources suggest happened. While police were hunting for a maniac, Milat was likely waving at them from the cab of an RTA truck. It is the ultimate cover. When you are in an official vehicle or you're wearing that orange vest, you are invisible. You're part of the scenery. You are part of the system. No one looks at a road worker and thinks predator. They think safety or maintenance or just, oh, road work ahead. This is going to be slow.
And he didn't use the big RTA trucks for the actual abductions, right? The sources are clear on that.
Correct. That's an important distinction to make. He drove the big trucks for work, which gave him the encyclopedic knowledge of the land. That was his reconnaissance. His office, if you will.
But for the actual crimes?
For the crimes, he used his personal vehicles. The sources say he had various 4WDs over the years. A Nissan Patrol, a Toyota Land Cruiser, rugged, powerful off-road vehicles.
But even then, the vehicle itself fits the persona he was building. These weren't creepy, windowless vans. These were the kind of vehicles you'd expect a guy who works outdoors to own.
Exactly. And they were fitted out with camping and hunting gear, bull bars, winches, spotlights. So if a backpacker looks inside his car, it doesn't look like a crime scene waiting to happen. It looks like a guy's rig for going on a weekend trip into the bush. It fits the story. It sells the lie.
Which brings us perfectly to part 2, the trap. The bait and switch. We've established the hunting ground was the Hume Highway. But let's really look at the target demographic. Who was he looking for on that road?
He was specifically targeting international tourists, backpackers. The sources highlight that the known victims were mostly German and British, and they were all doing the same thing, hitchhiking south from Sydney, probably heading towards Melbourne or the fruit-picking regions.
Now, hitchhiking has its own risks, obviously. We all know that. But the psychology of the lure here is just... it's fascinating and it's terrifying. Milat didn't snatch people from their beds. He didn't execute a violent public kidnapping at a rest stop.
No, nothing like that. He relied entirely on trust. He weaponized the friendly Aussie stereotype.
The larrikin almost.
Yes. The sources describe his persona as a rugged, friendly Aussie bloke. He would present himself as a gun enthusiast, a hunter, someone heading out for a camping trip. He'd talk about shooting kangaroos or pigs.
It's incredibly disarming, isn't it? If you're a German tourist and you're backpacking in Australia, you almost expect to meet a guy exactly like this, a guy with a big 4WD, maybe a rifle case in the back, talking about the bush. It feels authentic. It feels like the real Australia experience.
Precisely. That is why the lure worked so well. He wasn't hiding who he was, or at least the character he was playing. He played right into the cultural expectation of Australian hospitality. These backpackers, they were relying on the kindness of strangers. That is a fundamental necessity when you're backpacking on a budget. You have to trust people to get from point A to point B. Milat understood that vulnerability, and he exploited it to a monstrous degree.
So walk us through the deception, the mechanics of it. How does he get them from the side of the road into the depths of a forest? Because getting someone into the car is step one, but getting them to a secluded execution site without them panting is a whole other level of manipulation.
It's a step-by-step process of grooming, essentially, but all condensed into the span of a single car ride. Step one is the offer of a lift. Simple, helpful. Where are you headed? Hop in.
Easy enough.
Step two is utilizing that charm to lower their defenses. He chats with them, maybe he offers them a beer, he talks about hunting or the scenery, he normalizes his presence and, crucially, his equipment. He makes the rifle in the back seem like a tool for sport, not a threat. He's just a local guy.
And then comes step three, the switch.
The detour. After maybe an hour or so of driving, once trust has been established, he suggests a deviation from the main route. He probably says something like, hey, I know a great camping spot just off the road, or I'm heading into the Belanglo State Forest to trek some tracks. You should see it. It's beautiful in there.
And because he's established himself as this local expert, the roadman, the victims trust his recommendation. They don't question it.
Why would they? They think they're getting a unique local experience. Oh, the Lonely Planet guide doesn't mention this, but this friendly local is showing us the real Australia. It's an adventure.
Until it's not.
Until it's not. And that leads us directly to the location itself, the Belanglo State Forest. This isn't just a park. The sources describe it as a vast, dense location with a confusing maze of fire trails.
I've seen maps of this place. It's a pine plantation, isn't it? All the trees look the same.
Exactly. It's a monoculture pine forest. Perfect, straight rows and rows of identical trees. It is incredibly easy to get disoriented in there, even in broad daylight. Maze is the key word, and this goes right back to his job at the RTA.
His unique knowledge.
Only locals or forestry workers, people like Ivan Milat, could navigate these tracks without getting hopelessly stuck or lost. He knew them by heart. He knew exactly which trails were passable for his 4WD and which ones led to those perfect, isolated clearings. He knew where he could go where no one would stumble upon him for days, weeks, maybe ever.
And once they're off that highway and deep into that forest, that's when the dynamic shifts completely.
That is the grim reality of the switch. The friendly driver vanishes, the mask comes off. The sources indicate that once he was deep in the forest, likely miles from any paved road, he would stop the car. And then the violence would begin. He would restrain the victims. They were bound and gagged.
And this is where we have to really discuss the specific focus of this deep dive. The crimes themselves, the transition from abduction to murder. The sources use a very specific and chilling word, sport.
They do, and that is a heavy, deliberate word. It appears from the forensic evidence that Milat used his victims for target practice. This wasn't just about killing them quickly to get rid of them. There was a clear, ritualistic, sadistic element to it. He used firearms, specifically a Ruger 1022 rifle, which is a small caliber rifle.
A .22.
A .22, but he also used swords.
Swords. I mean, that just seems, it's so medieval, so incredibly brutal.
It is. The sources specifically mention the usage of swords and large machetes, which led to, among other injuries, decapitations. That suggests a level of brutality and a need for dominance that goes way beyond a simple homicide. A gun is a distance weapon. You can disconnect, to some degree, from the victim.
But a sword.
A sword is as personal as it gets. That is about absolute physical control. It's about inflicting the maximum amount of terror at the closest possible range.
And then the burial, or the lack of a proper burial. He didn't dig 6-foot deep graves.
No, the ground in Belanglo is notoriously hard and rocky. Digging a deep grave by hand would take hours in specialized equipment. It would be too much work. So he used a technique described in the sources as a hunter's blind.
What does that mean exactly?
He would place the bodies in shallow depressions and then cover them with sticks, ferns, and leaf litter. He basically built a natural camouflage over them, just like a hunter would build a blind to hide from deer.
Again, this speaks to his persona as a hunter. It's chilling. He treated the bodies of his victims like they were game he had bagged in the woods.
Exactly. He returned them to the forest floor, hidden just enough to not be seen by a casual passerby like a mushroom forager or a dirt biker, but not buried deep enough to be lost forever if you knew exactly where to look. It's the behavior of someone who sees other human beings as prey, nothing more.
It's absolutely chilling. He's using the very skills he claimed to have, the hunter, the outdoorsman, but using them to hide these unspeakable atrocities. Let's talk about the victims now, the Belanglo 7, as they came to be known. These bodies were found between 1992 and 1993, but we now know the killings span back to at least 1989.
And looking at the specific victims and the specific injuries they sustained helps us illustrate the terrible variety of the violence. It wasn't always the same method, which is deeply disturbing in itself. It suggests he was evolving or perhaps just getting bored with one method and deciding to try another.
Let's start with the Australian couple, Deborah Everest and James Gibson. They disappeared in late 1989. They were both just 19 years old.
Just kids, really. On an adventure, they were found in very shallow graves. An interesting point from the source material is that James Gibson's backpack was actually found first, but it was miles and miles away in a place called Galston Gorge.
So that threw the police off initially.
Completely. It sent them looking in totally the wrong area for months. But when their bodies were eventually discovered in Belanglo, the cause of death was clear. They had been stabbed to death. Multiple violent stab wounds.
So early on in his known timeline, we see the use of knives. Then we have the German victim found later, Simone Schmidl, who's 21.
Simone was also stabbed multiple times, but here the forensic evidence points to a specific and calculated kind of cruelty. There were multiple wounds to her upper spine.
Spinal wounds. What's the significance of that? Was he trying to paralyze her?
That's what the forensic experts believe. It was a methodical attempt to sever the spinal cord, to render the victim completely immobile but keep them conscious and aware.
My God.
That is a level of sadism that is just hard to comprehend. He didn't want to struggle. He wanted total, absolute control. He wanted them to be aware of what was happening to them, unable to move.
That is sickening. And then we have the other German couple, Anja Habschid, 20, and Gabor Neugebauer, 21. This is where the violence seems to escalate, or I guess very wildly.
Yes. This particular case highlights the extreme violence and the different methods he was willing to employ, even on two people taken at the same time. Gabor, the male victim, was shot in the head multiple times, execution style.
And Anja?
Anja was decapitated.
Decapitated.
By a sword or a large machete. And the host notes a very, very chilling fact from the source material. Her head was never found.
Never found. That implies, I mean, we'll get to the trophy aspect of his psychology later, but that is a terrifying detail. It implies he took it with him. He kept it.
It certainly does. It implies he kept a souvenir. It fits the profile of a predator who needs to keep a part of the victim to relive the crime, to maintain that sense of ownership and power long after the victim is gone.
And finally, we have the British victims, Caroline Clark, 21, and Joanne Walters, 22. The discovery of their bodies is what really kicked off the major investigation.
That's right. Joanne Walters was stabbed repeatedly, a frenzied attack similar to the first victims, but Caroline Clark, she is the victim most closely associated with that horrible target practice description.
What happened to her?
Caroline Clark was shot 10 times in the head.
10 times. With a .22 rifle.
10 times! That is profound overkill. You don't need 10 shots to kill someone, obviously. You do that because you are playing. You are using the victim as an object, a thing. It suggests he was taking his time, perhaps pausing between shots, using her head, which was covered by a folded bandana, as a literal target.
What does that tell you, as an expert, looking at this pattern? We have stabbings, some of which are clearly intended to paralyze. We have shootings. We have a decapitation. It's not a consistent MO in terms of the kill itself.
It suggests a killer who was experimenting. Or perhaps, more chillingly, a killer who derived specific, distinct pleasures from different forms of dominance. He wasn't stuck in a single modus operandi regarding the method of death. He was flexible. He was trying things out. It shows a deep, multifaceted sadism. He wanted to see what it felt like to stab, what it felt like to shoot, what it felt like to use a sword. Each murder was a different kind of performance for him.
It's just absolutely horrific. But for all his planning, for all his knowledge of the forest, there is a turning point in this story. A moment where the roadman made a critical mistake. A moment where the prey fought back and survived.
The one who got away. The crucial error.
Paul Onions. This narrative pivot is so important. Without Paul Onions, who knows how much longer this would have gone on, how many more bodies would be in that forest.
Paul Onions was a British backpacker, and this incident happened way back in January 1990, so right in the middle of this active period. He was hitchhiking south from Sydney, and he was picked up by a man who introduced himself as Bill.
Bill.
We now know, of course, that Bill was Ivan Milat.
So the setup is exactly the same. Backpacking, friendly driver, gets in the 4WD.
Yeah.
The charm, the small talk.
Exactly. They're driving south on the Hume Highway. But this time, Something was different. The escalation happened much faster. It happened while the car was still on the main road, or at least before Milat had total control deep in the forest. Milat pulls the car over to the side of the road, ostensibly to get something from the back.
And that's when the mask drops completely.
He pulls out a revolver and a length of rope. He tells Onions this is a robbery, but Onions sees the ropes. He sees the gun. He knows instinctively this is not just about his wallet.
Would you just imagine that moment? You're in a strange country, thousands of miles from home, on a lonely stretch of road, and the friendly driver who picked you up just pulls out a gun and ropes. The adrenaline dump must be absolutely insane.
Onion sensed immediate mortal danger. His survival instinct kicked in. He didn't freeze. He didn't comply. He acted.
The source says he unbuckled his seatbelt and just ran. But where did he run to?
This is the wildest part of the story, and it speaks to his sheer desperation. He didn't run into the bush, into the trees on the side of the road where Milat, the hunter, could have easily chased him down.
No, he ran the other way.
He sprinted across the active Hume highway, into oncoming traffic, multiple lanes of cars and trucks doing over 100 kilometers an hour.
He ran into traffic. That tells you everything you need to know about how terrified he was of Milat. He would rather risk getting hit by a semi-truck than stay in that car for one more second.
Exactly. It was a choice between certain death with Milat and a possible death on the highway. And he was, in fact, nearly hit by a passing motorist, a woman named Joanne Barry, who was driving with her family. She saw this terrified man running into the road, waving his arms frantically. She slammed on her brakes.
And she stopped for him. I mean, that's incredible bravery on her part, too. You see something like that, you don't know what's going on.
It is a true moment of heroism. Onions dove into her car. The sources say Milat actually chased him across the road and was banging on the side of Joanne Barry's vehicle as they sped off.
That is a scene straight out of a movie. But here is the frustrating part. This was in 1990. The first bodies aren't found for another 2 years. Why wasn't he caught then?
Onions reported it immediately to the local police. He gave a description. He mentioned the name Bill. He described the 4WD. But at that time, the bodies hadn't been found. It was logged as an attempted robbery, maybe an attempted abduction. It wasn't connected to a serial killer because no one knew there was a serial killer yet. Onions, understandably, eventually went back to the UK.
So the file just goes cold. It sits in a cabinet somewhere until the bodies start turning up in Belanglo in 92 and 93.
Right. Years later, Paul Onions is back in the UK. He's watching the news, and he sees these reports about the backpacker murders in Australia. He sees the location, Belanglo State Forest, just off the Hume Highway. And he has this horrifying moment of realization.
He made the call. I know that man. He tried to kill me.
That testimony was the absolute key link. It was the Rosetta Stone for the investigation. It finally identified the friendly driver persona. It gave the police a face and a potential name to look for. It shifted the investigation from looking for a ghost to looking for a specific type of predator who drove a 4WD and called himself Bill. Onions flew back to Australia to formally identify Ivan Milat in a police lineup.
And that leads us to the raid. Task Force Air, the special police unit formed to catch the killer, raids Ivan Milat's home in Eagle Vale, a suburb of Sydney, in May 1994. And this is where we see inside the mind of the killer in a way that is it's pure pathology. They didn't just find a guy, they found a hoarder.
A hoarder of death, that's the only way to describe it. Milat treated his victims' possessions as trophies, as inventory. His house was a museum of his crimes.
Let's list some of this stuff because the scale of it is just mind-boggling. The sources say they found camping gear, sleeping bags, water bottles, backpacks, all belonging to the victims. And they were hidden in wall cavities and stuffed into the ceiling space.
He was literally insulating his house with the belongings of the people he killed. Think about that for a second. He was living, eating, sleeping inside a structure that was packed from floor to ceiling with the evidence of his crimes. He was completely surrounded by it.
And it wasn't just hidden away. There were items he was actively using or had given away.
Yes. They found a camera. It had belonged to Simone Schmidl. He had gifted that camera to his brother's girlfriend.
Did you imagine being that girlfriend? Realizing later where that Christmas or birthday gift came from? Realizing you were taking family photos with a dead woman's camera?
It's sickening. It's a level of depravity that's hard to process. But the most damning, the most arrogant, the most unbelievable piece of evidence. When the police raided the house early in the morning, they stormed in and pulled Milat out of bed. And the T-shirt that Ivan Milat was wearing at that moment, it belonged to one of the male victims.
He was wearing it to bed.
He was wearing it.
That is, I honestly don't even have words for that kind of hubris.
It's the ultimate arrogance. It's a psychology of total ownership. He believed he owned the victims, body and soul. Keeping their items wasn't just for material gain. He had a job. He could afford to buy a t-shirt. It was about keeping a piece of the crime. It was his trophy, and to wear it in his own home. That shows how completely untouchable he felt. He was walking around, living his life, wearing the clothes of a man he had murdered, thinking to himself, I am smarter than everyone, no one will ever know.
He really did think he was invincible. And looking back at that road worker advantage, again, you can almost see why he felt that way. He'd gotten away with it for years.
The investigation took so long because the initial profile was completely wrong. As we said, police were looking for an unemployed loner, a drifter, someone who had all the time in the world to lurk on the highways. But Milat had a job. He had a schedule. He had to be at work on Monday.
But that schedule, the very thing that made him seem normal, is what eventually nailed him.
The alibi breaker. His RTA timesheets, they became his undoing. The police, once they had him as a primary suspect, they subpoenaed his work records going back years. They looked at the dates of all the disappearances, which were often on long weekends or public holidays, and they compared them to Milat's work records. And what did they find?
He was off work every single time.
Every single time. He was marked as RDO, rostered day off, or on annual leave during the exact windows the backpackers vanished.
So the bureaucracy of his job, the very system that gave him his cover, eventually provided the hard data to convict him. The paper trail caught up with him.
It completely destroyed his alibi. He couldn't claim he was working on the other side of the state. The records proved he was free to hunt.
And he never confessed, did he? Not once.
No. Ivan Milat was convicted in 1996 and given 7 consecutive life sentences plus 18 years with no possibility of parole. He died in the hospital of Long Bay Correctional Center in October 2019, terminal esophageal and stomach cancer. He went to his grave maintaining his innocence, refusing to confess.
And the police are certain there were more victims.
Oh, absolutely. They strongly suspect him of several other disappearances along Australian highways. There were other missing women, other unsolved cases in the Newcastle area where he also worked for a time. But he took those secrets with him. It was his final, pathetic act of control. By not confessing, he ensured the families of those other potential victims would never have closure. He maintained that power, that last little bit of control, even on his deathbed.
So what does this all mean? When we step back and look at the whole terrible story of the backpacker killer, we see this duality that is just. It's terrifying. The helpful road worker who was actually a predator. The friendly Aussie bloke who was a monster of unimaginable cruelty.
It's the betrayal of trust. That is the absolute core of the Hume highway murders. He took the very things that make travel and adventure, beautiful openness, trust in strangers, a sense of adventure, and he twisted them into a deadly trap. He turned the very infrastructure of the country against its visitors.
It certainly makes you look at a high-vis vest a little differently. It makes you realize that safety isn't just about the uniform, it's about the person inside it.
It absolutely does. And if we connect this all back to the bigger picture, there's one question, one thought that still haunts me about this case. It goes right back to that road working advantage.
What's that?
Ivan Milat worked that road for 20 years. He knew every unmapped trail. He knew that forest better than the park rangers did. And he refused to confess to anything beyond what was proven in court with forensic evidence. So you have to ask yourself, if he knew that landscape so intimately, and he was burying bodies in these hunters' blinds that were incredibly hard to find, how many other camping spots in that vast forest might still remain undiscovered?
That is a thought that will keep me up tonight, and I'm sure it will keep our listeners thinking too.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Stay safe out there.
See you next time.
Keep the shiny side up and the shadows in your rear view. You've survived another grave shift. Over and out.